Today on Between the Lines, an unorthodox approach to a profoundly human experience, grief, with my guest Ron Marasco. Welcome, I'm Barry Kibrick. Ron is a professor at Loyola Marymount University, and for the past 5 years has taught a course about the literature and drama of grief. But now, along with his co-author Brian Schuff, they turned the coursework into a useful tool for all. With their book called About Grief, they took not just a look at the sadness of grief, but at the insights learned, transformations made, and the grace notes of humanity.
Between the Lines with Barry Kibrick is made possible in part by
the government of Puerto Rico's tourism company, encouraging viewers to take a break and relax with a good book. Every page brings a new and exciting experience. Puerto Rico, cell phones optional.
I'm a writer today because I was a reader when I was 11 years old, and it was...
You do not need to prove your state of happiness to anybody.
Most of these speeches were as much as a month in preparation.
Characters, the heroes in this book, are seekers of truth in a story that involves a lot of corruption.
You don't get a chance to really talk about what's real, and it's the first thing to do.
Ron, welcome to Between the Lines. It's a pleasure to have you on the show.
It's nice to be here.
You know, it's funny. I told my wife and son I'm having Ron on about grief. And my son's first reaction is, oh, you mean the economic situation? Now, I know why you're laughing, because he thought I said Greece.
That's how we
so now wait,
off
that's what I'm saying. Now, this is before I read the book. The first words in the book this is the first words in the book are, when you're talking about grief, most people think you said Greece.
It happens all the time. It's something that's not in the book. It wasn't that long ago. I went into a store because I wanted to see other grief books, and I said, where do you have any books on grief? And the lady said, food or travel? And there you have it. They think you're saying Greece because I think they don't realize that you're going to maybe write a book about grief.
Well, it is that, but that's what we're going to be talking about grief. And what makes it interesting in this case is it's really started out as lectures that you gave at Loyola Marymount.
Yeah.
And you use all the different sources, from Shakespeare to Joan Didion to all these different sources in here. And the one thing that you make clear is the etymology of grief comes from the word weight.
Yes.
The burden of carrying extra weight, that is grief.
And I think, you know, grief is a subject that people search all kinds of metaphors, but the most common, and I think the most right one, is weight. In that you have, when you lose somebody, and it is significant that it rises to the level of a grief, you are going to carry something around for the rest of your life. It is a burden. It is something that you will hold. You will get used to it. You will have help with it. It may seem lighter over time, but the fact is that that is it. And one of the things people, I think, don't realize enough about grief is that it's strenuous and so it's tiring.
Well, you also tell us, even within this group, there's no absolutes. Each individual will grieve differently, will react differently to how people react to them grieving, will react differently to how they react to themselves grieving. There's no absolutes.
Right away. I think that too often people think there's certain things that you're supposed to do. You got to give them room, you got to give them time, you got to let them do things with their own individuality. It's bad enough that they've lost somebody, but then to have their self-esteem lowered because they're not doing what they're supposed to be doing with grief is a double whammy. You know, C.S. Lewis quotes this thing, which is from the Bible, about suffering over your suffering. And not only did they lose somebody in grief, but they think something is wrong with them. They think that, am I depressed, or I am not what I was. If you got hit by, God forbid, a truck and you broke every bone in your body, how long is it going to be before you're able to kind of move the same way and function the same way. So, people have to be patient. It's not something that, that's why I dislike the notion of closure, and most people in grief don't like it, because it's basically saying, okay, closure, can we stop talking about this depressing subject right now? Have you closed? And there is no such thing as closure, and there's a kind of force. I think sometimes people are sort of forced into it. It takes a while. There's a new normal.
The thing that I enjoyed seeing here was where you say grief teaches you a lot about yourself. Yeah. That's an awareness that I think, if there's something you're going to take away positively about grief, that would be it.
Well, grief is the most honest thing that can happen, because there's just nowhere to hide. If you're sick, you can still maybe delude yourself into believing that, and it happens, that tomorrow the miracle's coming. There's no miracles for grief. So it has happened. It is the most honest thing. And honesty is what really learning is. George Bernard Shaw said a great thing, I think, about learning, which is you learn. It's a line in a play. It says, one character says to the other, you learn something, and that feels at first like you lost something. And I think that's true of grief, that you often lose certain things about yourself. People really do change. It's amazing, because sometimes the very capable Rock of Gibraltar can't handle it. And then somebody who you wouldn't have thought would be able to step up and have that kind of soul strength somehow finds reserves of it. So you don't know what's going to happen. You can't really predict who's going to handle it.
But what struck me, what you said before, I want to hit it again, because I think this is the most troubling aspect of it, is that when people are in grief, they're upset about being upset. And I want to hit that one home again, because that's one of the biggest emotional problems I think people face in general, is that they're upset about something, and then they're upset about the fact that they're upset about something. And in grief, that seems to hit to the bone.
And you just have to understand that like I said, you're carrying this load. It's strenuous. Do you know how many grieving people cry so hard in the shower? That's their spot. So everybody else, when they take a shower, they're kind of whistling and thinking through their day. The grieving person often uses that time because they're alone, the water's running, no one can hear them. And it's amazing, but grieving people will tell you this. Now, when you leave and you've spent the morning that way, you carry that with you. It's very, very strenuous. It's very exhausting. And sometimes people think they're depressed. They're not depressed. They're tired. They're soul tired. And so you have to find ways to sometimes do what you would normally do in healing, is put your foot up. So how do you find a way to put your soul up? Put your emotional life up on a pillow while you watch TV.
I haven't figured it out. Just for the record, I mean, and your emotional life in general, even without grief, it's difficult to do. That's why where grief is so final, it becomes, as you said, like as if you broke every bone in your body. How long would it take for you to even function somewhat normally?
But also grief it's not that something is wrong when somebody dies. It's very difficult, but it doesn't mean that there is something wrong with life itself, the process of what life is. And so I think there's some salvation in thinking that, but for the most part, you have to use your own mechanism, your own self. There's nothing more intimate on some level than grieving. It's so intimate because people, more than other problems, people don't even share it with the person that's closest to them. Husbands and wives are lying next to each other, neither one of them falling asleep in bed, but not quite able to talk about it. So grief is such an intimate thing that it's sometimes in the most intimate place of anything.
Well, intimate in two ways, in fact. As you said, and as Joan Didion wrote in her book, the interconnectedness between the two souls that one is grieving over. They are so connected on a soul level that when one goes, there is a hole left in the soul.
Well, we talk about this here in the cover of Joan Didion's book. I'm sure other people have seen this, but I was sitting there with it, and I noticed that in the graphic that there were 4 letters that were a slightly different color than Joan Didion, Year of Magical Thinking. And it's spelt out John. That's her husband. And I thought that's a perfect metaphor to me for grief. And talked about this with my co-writer, that's what it is. Those letters are pulled out. And, you know, how these small details that are so everyday, what C.S. Lewis calls the heartbreaking commonplace, you know.
May I use your words from the book that you said? I love this. Real love is not a small blending of big things, but a big blending of small things. I wanted to use those exact words because they touched me.
Love is details. You know, the person you love the most is the person you have the most details about. And it's interesting because I'm kind of a person interested in word origins, because a lot of times within the word there's a sort of secret soul to the word. And the word detail, tail, that part of it comes from the same root as tailor. So it means a piece of something. Literally a piece that gets, a tailor is somebody who cuts pieces. And that's what a detail is. So it is cut out of your life. I mean, it's literally taken out of your life. So you have to, the grieving people know that there's a new normal. You're not the same person. You're going to be different. And there's no choice for that, because Joan Didion has lost the J and the O and the H and the N.
Well, you say the stuff left behind, and one of them that really caught my eye was the smell. I don't know why, but for some reason, you know how you get little emotional trickles when you said the smell, and then I swear to you, I smelt my grandmother's apartment as I was reading it. I smelt my mother's closet as I was just reading those words.
And so many people, there's a couple of reasons for it. I think there are nobody that grieves for somebody if they can possibly smell their clothes or smell their pillow. And the difficult thing is that sometimes, you know, that fades over time, and you're losing that. There's a story that we told in there about a mother whose kid was missing for a while, and he ended up he died of a drug situation, but they couldn't find him. And while she was looking around, she's a nervous mother. She did every bit of his laundry. She washed everything. Typical mother. That's how you keep yourself busy. She washed everything. The boy died, and she was so aware of, she had washed him away in a way. I mean, just a normal thing that she did, but she didn't have that thing to hold on to. And we say things like this just so that somebody goes, am I crazy to be sitting here smelling this, touching this? No, you're not. It's fine.
You mentioned what a mother does. In the book, you do go into how men and women do grieve differently. Yeah. Men are obviously more, especially you talk about in our society today, that we're almost stifling the maleness, the masculine aspect to come out. And it's really, you can see it's damaging our own society by that.
It's made men very sort of immobile and not quite knowing what to do. But the fact is, there's more than one way to grieve than just by expressing yourself in a language that other people find acceptable. Men speak in different kinds of languages, So maybe the man is not going to sit around the living room and say eloquent things about how he feels. Maybe he'll do something else. Maybe he's going to be strong at a time. Maybe he's going to fix things. I find that men are fixers, for better or for worse. And it's a hard thing in grief because there's nothing to fix. So they kind of don't have quite the place. But I think people should forgive it. The example we give is, it's almost like currency, that what a small bit of an emotional expression is for some men is really an enormous thing for somebody else. So the father that says something like, he was a damn good kid, which seems like, is that all you're going to say about your son? But from a certain kind of father, that is equivalent to somebody else who's going to stand up and give a stunning eulogy. And so I think men need to be kind of forgiven Because again, they get this thing that not only did you lose somebody, but come on, you're not grieving well, you have to be doing this, you have to be doing that. And, we quote something there of Robert Bly's, it's a poem, says, some men don't finish sentences. There's all kinds of language. Helping somebody is language,
You say better than words.
Yeah.
Was there a story you talk about, here all these people came in with food to the grieving, and then they all leave and the poor woman is there left now to clean up the whole mess, where sometimes just lending a hand is better than any words you can offer.
Alan King had one of his neighbors who said, she lost somebody and the neighbor said, well, we're going to pray for you. And she said, don't pray for me, why don't you do some dishes? And the example that we give in the book is, if you had to drive somewhere tomorrow morning at 6 a.m. and go pick up a package down in Orange County, and you got up in the morning and there was a note from your son on the table saying, Dad, I know you have to go pick up that package, I feel so bad for you. Or you get up in the morning and the package is on the table with a note from your son saying, I picked it up, Dad, go back to bed. So to me, men, that's the language of men. They may not be the language of cards and notes, but it's the language of some other things, and I think it's legitimate.
But what happens is, you say it, shame. Men in particular, in a certain case, if they're not sure of how they're grieving, shame is one of the most unspoken aspects of grief. And shame is, I swear to you, shame may be harder to live with than grief. I can't imagine anything harder than grief. But the shame, then you're really at a loss.
It's funny you put your finger on that, because personally, I find that the most touching aspect of grief, and the thing that we wanted to say in the book the most, which is, grief, people are sick. Terrible things happen. It's messy. It's awkward. They have seen images that are terrible. And they have all of these things. And they feel a kind of shame that this has happened to them. And I think it's the reverse. To me, you should feel a sense of valor. You were there, you hung in there. You were in a place, and even though it might be difficult, you hung in there. So you should not feel shame if you've been through something, or you've been there bearing witness to something that might be ugly or even horrible. You were there. Shakespeare says about love, love bears it out even to the edge of doom. So there have been grieving people that very bravely stood at a perilous edge and they stayed there. And so to me, I think I'm so touched that people would feel shame about that, rather than feeling that there's a kind of heroism there. So you see these little examples of what in the cover of the book we call grace notes. And they really are a lot in grief. You see these things that people do, little bits of quiet gallantry that are totally unself-conscious, that people do that are very affirming of people.
Well, the affirming part also seems, let me see how I can put this. It's the process, because isn't that what you bring out here? It's a process. It's not a moment in time, it's a process. So like a process, it's a journey. And it's a journey in this case, as you say, being glued back together.
Yeah,
you're not the same. You're not, you can't, repair and make whole, but you become re-glued.
Some do, and there's a line of Hemingway's where he says, the world breaks everybody, but some people are stronger at the broken places. That's true, perhaps, for some grieving people. It's not true for all, but glued back together is still a version of whole. And that line was just something we saw in an obituary. We found things for this book in the most unofficial ways. Things we'd overhear in a cafe or a bar, talking to people that sat next to us on an airplane, reading obituaries.
I've got one here. I had to go to. This is the one that you read out of Douglas Hofstadter. Soul shards, because death ends a life you say, but not a relationship. And these soul shards that that person had, almost in physics, I've had Gerald Schroeder on, a physicist, who says they cannot be destroyed. So they are somewhere, and most likely they are within parts of you.
Exactly. The line, death doesn't end a life, it ends a relationship, is from the playwright Robert Anderson.
But soul shards was from...
Soul shards is Hofstadter. And this notion of exactly what you're saying, I just think to people, of people in grief, when somebody dies, are they only going to be a tragic story? You know, to a degree, grief is a story, too. It's a story that you tell yourself. It's a story that you tell other people. It's a story that you reread at night. And what is the story? Is it just that a horrible thing happened? Is it just about loss? But if it is, then that's all somebody is. And the trick is to, how are you able to appreciate the soul shards?
Well, you said, in fact, you asked, there was no dissent. You asked people, if I could eliminate your grief immediately, and the only thing that would have to happen is you never could have been in love with that person to begin with, would you do it? And no matter how much grief they felt, no matter how much shame, no matter how much suffering, not one person that you spoke to said they would.
And if somebody feels that way, and they feel that I would have rather not known my child, not had my child, than have lost my child, then that's a level of, Isadora Duncan lost her child, and she said there are some sorrows that kill, and to a degree there are. There are sorrows that will kind of end somebody's personality sort of as we know it. But far more often, people learn over time to say, I had this person. They were mine. That is, as we wrote in the book, written in the book of the universe, it says somewhere, you were my son, my mother, my pal, whatever, my student. And there it is. And how over time can you get not only maybe comfort from that, but actual moments of joy. Or maybe, I think maybe the word is pride,
Can I use your own words? Because I actually love it. This is the challenge of grief. To take the mess of pieces you fell into upon your loved one's death and glue yourself together into something approaching whole again. And that is what you're talking about. It's that, again, we go back to that process. It's not the same. It never will be. The weight is there. The grief, the burden is there. But Carla Malton I had on, she wrote a book called After Image. And she said, the heart might be broken, but it's still beating.
Yeah. And that it's interesting because you keep saying the term process, which is exactly right, I think. And I over time, I've come to think of it as it's a sort of a spiral, which is, or corkscrew really, you're going forward, but there are times where you're saying, oh my God, meaning and having had them, and then the bottom drops out again.
You say an anvil. The anvil hits. At that funniest moment, the anvil strikes.
We this is a term, and we actually get things from people that say, read your book, had a lot of anvils today. And what that is that's when somebody just notices something, that you look down and you go, oh my God, this cup was the same cup that they had, and bam, it hits you totally unexpected. I just heard from a lady, it's not in the book, but I heard from a lady who lost her husband 6 months before. She's going to her mailbox, and the 6-month grieving person opens up her mailbox, sees, a postcard, turns it over, it's from her husband. Well, it was the dentist, the 6-month cleaning that we all fill out and send to ourselves. So she turns the thing over, sees her husband's handwriting. What is this, a postcard from, and that's an anvil. And those things happen to people a lot. Big, small, I think it's really the toughest thing in terms of long-term grieving.
Well, Ron, I'm going to end without an anvil. I'm going to end with what fixes it. Broken? Yes. Reglued, yes, but a version of whole nonetheless. Thank you, Ron, and thank you guys for joining us. Now, before Ron leaves, I'd like to leave you with these words from About Grief. Finally, we learned how often people can, even in the face of such sadness, be capable of, as Ron said before, grace notes. Those little touches of humanity that remind us what a rare piece of work a human being can be and how good life really is. I'm Barry Kibrick. There is a great span between joy and grief, but look closely at those grace notes of humanity and remind yourself how good life is. Thank you, Ron.
Thank you.
If you'd like to get in touch with us, want a DVD or transcript of our show, catch an episode online, or receive our weekly updates, go to www.klcs.org/BTL.